to the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, the Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Appreciate everybody tuning in, listening to the podcast. Definitely thank you, especially with my absence the last couple weeks. Just a lot of stuff going on in the Bartle household. So I've been busy, and I'm currently dealing with some type of summer cold. So I've been hacking up a lung, and it has not been fun. So needed to get something recorded. So I enlisted the help of my guy, Brandon Huffman. Not a super long conversation for this one, but there's a lot of good information that Huffman shares with it. So obviously it's a big weekend of recruiting and official visits for Utah and some of their key targets who will be visiting elsewhere. So like I said, Huffman hopped on with me to talk all about it. But Utah is welcoming in an exciting group of official visitors this weekend. I think Utah's got a chance to land at least a couple commitments from this group. Obviously, the headliner is Felix Ojo, the number one offensive tackle in the 2026 class. Just an incredible job by Utah to obviously get in the game, to work the relationships that they have, and to, get this last visit. This is not insignificant. Obviously, there is a massive hill to climb with Ojo in his recruitment, and obviously Texas is the overwhelming favorite. It is overwhelming. But the fact that Utah is bringing him in for an official visit is significant. So pretty big deal. But also Utah is going to be bringing in UCLA commits Jaron and Kenan Pula, both of whom are, blue chip prospects, receivers, two-way athletes, that type of thing, as well as Tim View's Asa Nyaliai, who I think, Utah's got a pretty good shot at those three. And then they'll also be bringing in Perrion Williams, who's a dynamic little receiver, great speed. I think he is definitely on commit watch this weekend. And then offensive lineman Rowdy Pierce and defensive back Dylan Waters. That's the group for Utah this weekend. Obviously, they've got some key targets that'll be visiting elsewhere. Salesi Moa, Kelvin Obot, and some other guys as well. So I'll keep it short since I'm nearly out of breath doing this, but also, wanted to pass along that I'll be bringing on some more guests here in the coming days and weeks. Mostly, Utah's commits. I've already talked to Michael Johnson about that, and he's excited to hop on. Marcus Bell as well, so I'm excited to get those guys on here. But then too, I'm gonna start bringing on some more analysts in other markets to get a feel for the Big 12 and the 2025 season. So should be fun. Anyways, let's get to my conversation with Brandon Huffman. He is 24/7 Sports national recruiting editor Brandon Huffman, better known as Huff, taking some time during a busy day and a busy month, a really busy month, to chat with me real quick. Huff, man, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. How you doing, man?
Living the dream here, Steve. It's been a fun month. It's winding down. And, it's fascinating to see how June is the new January in the recruiting cycle.
I wanted to ask you about that because it is it's completely changed the calendar where now you have, June used to be kind of the time off for us in the industry, but now it's the busiest time of the year.
I remember a time, and you went to the opening final, so you remember that was always like the crescendo, if you will, of the summer. Once the opening happened, Elite 11 happened, everything was pretty much chill to that point. And you got to the point where the Elite 11 finals is not the end of it. That was always in mid-July. Now you're spending the entire month of June at college camps, at national events. And then you have all the official visits and the announcements coming that last week in June, first week in July. So it's incredible. But I will say this, it is nice that the NCAA finally decided to have a dead period the entire month of July, so that there's not that 1 week at the end of July where we all have to go cover camps. But other than that, NCAA, feel free to pass on a dead period to the media.
Yeah, please. We'll gladly take it.
100%.
All right, man. Well, cool. Like I said, I know you're busy, so your time is precious. So let's just dive right into it, and let's start here. Obviously, we're approaching the end of the official visit period, and Utah seems to be in a pretty good spot, with a handful of top targets. And so let's start with the number one ranked player in the state of Utah, Salesi Moa. Lately there's been a lot of talk of Washington and Utah. He just wrapped up a visit to Michigan, and he'll be visiting Tennessee this weekend. What's your take on where things stand with Moa and Utah and how that relates to Utah?
I mean, I think a lot of people thought with, his brother's recruitment and, being a one-time Utah commit, heading elsewhere, that maybe that would sour the Moa family on Utah, even though Ben is an alum. But that doesn't seem to be the case at all. It still seems that there's a lot of life in that potential marriage. Michigan's obviously given him a lot to consider. Michigan's done a really good job kind of in the mountain region. They've already got the number one player in the state of Montana. They're going at it this weekend with Kelvin Obot, Jax Tanner, who's also up in Idaho. They're in the mix for. And so they've really done a good job of kind of making those guys their focus. And so Celestia has been a big target for them for quite some time. But, you've also got Tennessee, and Tennessee offers a lot of stuff that I think makes them a contender. 2 weeks ago, he went down to Florida and was at the Justin Jefferson receiver camp. And so when you're at an event like that, there may be that feel like, hey, maybe I am an SEC guy. Maybe I want to go play in the SEC. And the SEC will always attract that. But you got Utah right there in your backyard. And this class is shaping up to be a pretty good class. And, they could be in the mix for the number one player in the state of Utah and the number one player in the state of Idaho, who are both obviously of interest to them.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition. That's why you're a pro and why you're
that's why I threw it to you.
Yep, I love it. So let's talk about him. Kelvin Obot, obviously, he has a Final Four that includes Nebraska, Michigan, Oregon, and Utah. He's already visited, the previous three, with Michigan on tap this weekend. Utah, you've talked about it, and you've been all over Obot's recruitment, and you've said from the beginning that Utah, has a pretty good chance of landing Obot as we get to this final weekend of visits. Where do things stand with Obot, and how do you feel about Utah's chances to, like you said, potentially land the number one player in the state of Idaho?
Yeah, I wrote this week on 24/7 Sports that while there's a 4-team battle, this really seems to be a 2-team battle right now. It's Utah against Michigan. And I have felt that Utah has been at the forefront, if not the absolute front, of his recruitment for some time. And we haven't even gotten into the attachment that there is to Utah, given who his head coach is. But that certainly doesn't hurt. Michigan was the one visit he took this spring where he was wide-eyed and just raved about it. He went on a big tour of some Midwest schools and some Southeast schools, went to the West Coast, went to USC, and dropped them from his list after going there for an unofficial visit. In Nebraska has long maintained a presence as recruitment, but Oregon, I don't necessarily see him going to Oregon. I feel like it's been a Utah-Michigan battle for some time. I still think Utah's out in front, but they've got to weather the storm of this last visit being with Michigan. At the end of the day, I think he goes to Utah. Haven't put in a crystal ball for it yet, but I do feel like the Utes are in a very good spot. If you look at what they have coming in this weekend with Felix Ojo coming in, when you spend the last 2 months reading about 2 potential first-round draft picks at the tackles position, that tells you 2 things. Development is phenomenal. Utah is doing a phenomenal job of developing offensive linemen. What that's also telling you, there may be 2 vacant offensive tackle spots in 2026. And so that's certainly something when you're an offensive tackle, I know I can get developed, and shoot, I might get on the field right away because there may be some vacancies. So that's something Utah definitely has in their advantage. Plus, it's close enough to home for him. He was never going to go to Boise State. It's close enough for home, but it's also still far enough away where there's like that healthy medium there. So I like where the Utes sit for Kelvin Obot going into the Michigan visit.
I like that. And you brought up Felix Ojo, obviously the number one tackle in the 2026 class. Utah probably shocked the country when it was announced that he was going to be officially visiting this weekend. But I think you laid it out perfectly that, hey, Utah not only is developing, 2 current offensive tackles on their roster, but there's also a decent chance that both of those offensive tackles are going to be, moving on to the next level. And there's an open spot for 1, maybe 2 blue chip prospects to come in and play right away. What do you make of Ojo's recruitment and Utah's chances to not necessarily, land his commitment, because it is a massive uphill climb with, who's involved with him, but at least make a good impression.
I'm going to age myself a bit. And, back in the day, there was a Sesame Street little skit that was one of these kids is not like the other. One of these is doing his own thing. And if you look at that Final Five, if you're a West Coast football fan, you've been following the football played on the West Coast, this isn't a surprise to you. But if you're a fan from the state of Texas and you're a University of Texas fan or you're a Michigan fan, you're wondering how in the heck is Utah in this Final Five? How are they getting the last visit? Remember, we're still in a time where that last visit is still a very crucial visit. You wonder how they get it. Well, go back to what I said 5 minutes ago. When you spent the last 2 months reading about 2 potential first-round draft picks at the offensive tackle position coming from Utah, there's vacancy and there's development. So while they may be the longest of shots, especially when you got, the juggernaut in his backyard that does a really good job of developing offensive linemen. I think that the first offensive lineman picked in this last draft was a Texas offensive lineman who was an in-state kid. It does seem like they're going up against a lot. But one thing is for certain, that Utah's track record of developing offensive linemen, Utah's track record of developing guys in the front seven, it's not as big a surprise if you know what you're looking at. And so while it may be a long shot and most people think he's going to stay in state, the fact that Utah is dancing this late and with the teams that they're dancing against, the last 2 national champions, the likely preseason number 1 team, and then Florida, you got to feel good about, if you're Utah, just to get him to take a visit, because even the marketing of that is big.
Yeah, I agree. The marketing of it, you're creating headwaves when you bring in the number 1 player from the state of Texas. Like it's a big deal. And, I think too, college programs are also a little more mindful of, the future. You never know what's going to happen down the road with the transfer portal and all of that. So bringing a kid in, is as much about the here and now as it is, now with, like I said, the transfer portal and player changes and all of that. You're providing a good impression that, hey, if a player enters the portal and he visited Utah, he's going to call back on that. And I think that is something that, college programs are mindful of as well. And so to finish this up, Huff, like I said, I know you're busy, so let's keep this short and sweet and all that. But Utah is going to be bringing in a handful of other visitors this weekend along with Ojo. And I think what is exciting is the in-state kids that are going to be visiting. Timpview's Isa Yalie and the Pula twins, Jaron and Keenan, are going to be visiting this weekend. Pretty big deal for Utah to get those guys for the last visit, considering the in-state recruiting between Utah and BYU. What do you make of Utah's chances with those 3 in particular?
Well, obviously, that has been kind of the bread and butter of Kyle Whittingham and his staff over the years. And they maybe lost a little bit of momentum in the last 2 classes. It kind of started with our guy who announced for BYU at the All-American Bowl in 2024. I want to say from Bountiful. And that was one of those where you're like, oh, okay, maybe momentum shifting a little bit. And then obviously Utah's done well. But if you can go get a Salesi Moa, you can get the Pula twins, you get an Isa, that changes the narrative quickly. I was with LaMarcus Bell on Tuesday at the Northwest Showcase, and he wasn't working out, but he did come down and watch a couple of his teammates who really did well. And we were talking about Utah, and he just said, don't be surprised if some big things go down. And I tried to get him to hint at it. He wouldn't, to his credit. But keep in mind that there's some funny history there. LaMarcus Bell plays on the same 7-on-7 team as Brock Harris. His other close friend is Terrence Serion, who flipped from Washington to BYU. Mm-hmm. So I asked Marcus, I'm like, so who's a better recruiter, Brock or you? He said, just keep an eye on some big things happening. So take that for what you will, because Keenan and Jaron Pula play on that same 7-on-7 team. So if we're going to have a little bit of a recruiting rivalry, right now it's 2-1 from Big 12 performance towards BYU. So 2 + 1 makes 3. We'll see if LaMarcus is as good of a recruiter as he says he is.
I love it, Huff. Appreciate the insight, and really excited. I think a lot of fans are excited about LaMarcus Bell. So you've been, like I said, all over his recruitment and providing good analysis there as well. So Huff, appreciate you, dude. Hope you're doing well and staying busy. Let the people know where they can find you. Obviously, if they don't, they're what are we doing here? But let the people know where they can find you.
It's your loss if you're not, but if you haven't been able to find me yet and you just got Twitter or X at Brandon Huffman, go to 247sports.com. All our information is there. All kinds of stuff happening. We are in the best 2 weeks, if you will, of college football recruiting are these next 2 weeks. So you do not want to miss out on any of that information.
A lot of action coming up over the next 2 weeks. Should be a lot of fireworks, a lot of fun. Huff, appreciate the time, man. Always good to catch up with you.
Likewise, Steve. Appreciate it.